Good afternoon and evening, everyone, and welcome to our special online event, Strengthening the Fight Against Animal Cruelty, Why the ACE Act Matters. I'm Joseph Grove, Senior Communications Director for Animal Wellness Action and the host of the Animal Wellness Podcast. I'll introduce our panelists in a moment, but first, a few quick notes. This event is brought to you by Animal Wellness Action and the Center for a Humane Economy. It is part of our Claudia Miller Ignite series on animal welfare. By registering, you have joined our ranks. You're on the team. Thank you. Welcome aboard. We hope you'll find the content we send you to be educational and inspiring, and that you'll take advantage of its ability to connect you to your legislators and other officials to make your voice for animals heard loudly and clearly. Next, we've set aside some time at the end of the event to answer your questions. You should see in your Zoom window a QA button or a question button. Please enter any questions through that button. I'll keep an eye on them and ask as many as I can at the end of the event. Tomorrow, everyone who is registered will receive a link to the recording of the webinar, as well as any assets that may be mentioned throughout. We invite you to share that link and information with anyone who may have a similar heart for animals. Now I'll introduce our speakers. Wayne Pacelli is the founder and president of Animal Wellness Action and the Center for a Humane Economy. He's recognized 7 times as one of the nation's top nonprofit executives. He's a 2-time New York Times bestselling author and has spearheaded over 1,500 state and 100 federal laws for animal protection. Dr. Thomas Poole is a veterinary expert with decades of leadership in public health and military service. A former commander of the U.S. Army Veterinary Command and territorial veterinarian of Guam, he now brings his expertise to Animal Wellness Action and the Center for a Humane Economy. Zach Scow is the Central Valley, California Director for Animal Wellness Action and the founder of Marley's Mutts, a rescue that has saved thousands of animals. His journey from battling life-threatening liver disease to transforming lives, both human and canine, inspired him to create Positive Change, which pairs rescue dogs with inmates for the rehabilitation of both. Thank you, distinguished panel. Wayne, I'll turn it over to you.
Joseph, thank you so much, and glad to have you hosting. And I want to make sure that people listen to the Animal Wellness podcast that you host. It's such an important podcast. I know you've had Zach and Dr. Poole on previously. We'll have a lot of other great guests. I'm really happy to share the panel with Dr. Tom Poole, my friend and colleague, our senior veterinarian, and also with Zach Scow, who's in Kern County in the Central Valley of California in Tehachapi. And we're really here tonight to talk about a very important campaign that we're conducting at Animal Wellness Action and the Center for Humane Economy. And that is to create an animal cruelty crimes section at the United States Department of Justice. And we have all thought about the many manifestations of animal welfare. And when you think about the organizations, the 2 that I'm representing tonight, and Zach's organization, Marley's Mutts as well, we only exist because there's a problem. If everyone were kind to animals, if everyone were alert to their suffering, we wouldn't need to be focused on battling animal cruelty. Every movement is born out of some crisis. The environmental or conservation movement in the 19th century was a response to the liquidation of the bison and the elk and the passenger pigeon and just the raw commercial exploitation of wildlife in North America as new residents of our continent were moving westward. The humane movement in the 1860s was formed because people were beating and overworking horses on the streets. And people rose up and said, no, these are incredible, helpful, loyal animals, and you're beating the heck out of them to get a little more action out of them. And it's wrong. And people stood up and said, no, there's a better way to conduct ourselves as civilized human beings. And now you think of all the many causes in the world, animal welfare is one of the biggest. By one measure, there are 35,000 animal welfare groups in the United States. What does that mean? There's an enormous problem for animals, an enormous problem for animals. And we at AWA and the Center for Humane Economy are taking on the biggest fights. We're taking on factory farming. We're taking on needless and duplicative animal testing and research. We're taking on trophy hunting and commercial trapping and dogfighting and cockfighting and horse slaughter, puppy mills, a wide variety of other problems that exist. The killing of elephants for their ivory, rhinos for their horns, bears for their gallbladders. It is an immense task. And one of the things that I started working on early in my career was, I did protesting and I tried to raise awareness. I think those are very important things to do. But at some level, there have to be rules and norms in society. We have to have rules to shield animals from cruelty. And what that means is that we need standards to say, you don't have absolute freedom. We have freedom as an important value for us as a country. We value the freedom to make choices in society, but there are limits. You're not allowed to just walk up and punch somebody in the face just because you want to see them fall to the ground. There are rules and standards. And if you think that fighting dogs is fun and you're going to enjoy gambling on it, you're not allowed to do that in our society any longer. We say that your freedom has some limits. Now, these are not onerous limits. You can live a great life and you can have just about everything in the world without subjecting other creatures to cruelty. But as we all know, there's such an asymmetrical relationship between humans and the other species that inhabit this planet with us. We're not always the biggest, we're not always the fastest, but we're the smartest, we're the most resourceful. And that means that if someone has a cruel heart, or if they have a strictly reductionist economic perspective, they can exploit animals, and the animals are powerless against them. So it's up to us to be the shield to stop the sword that strikes these other creatures. And to me, this is one of the most noble causes that can possibly exist. We are fighting for animals who literally cannot speak for themselves. They are at our mercy. And I wish we could just educate people and we could speak in reasonable terms. We could say, hey, we just want to logically apply anti-cruelty standards in our society. But a lot of people just don't seem to get the memo. And that is what results in breeding sows in gestation crates, and it results in bears being killed for their gallbladders, and it results in roosters being slashed apart with knives or curved ice picks called gaffs that are attached to their legs for staged combat between animals so people can watch and get amused and gamble on the outcome. So we have to have standards in our society. But once we impose those standards, there has to be a way to see that they're observed and honored. And the popular show Law and Order, the opening, which I kind of know in my head, but I'm just going to read it just to make sure I get it right. Is the people are represented by two separate but equally important groups: the police who investigate crimes and the district attorneys who prosecute the offenders. So when we have laws, we have to have people to enforce those laws. But if you look at the federal level, where they're not called district attorneys, they're called federal prosecutors or United States attorneys, we don't have anybody, not one person, with a sign on his or her door that says, I work on animal cruelty crimes. They've got environmental crimes. They've got Indian affairs. They've got women's rights. They've got civil rights. They've got a lot of important purposes and focus areas for their prosecutorial work. But you're never going to find animal cruelty. And we want to change that. That's why we want you to be part of that change, because no big reform ever happens just because Dr. Tom Poole or Wayne Pacelli or Zach Scout thinks it up. It's when thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people demand of their lawmakers and cabinet officials that we can do better as a society. Now, there is a bill that we have worked to engineer and to craft called the ACE Act, the Animal Cruelty Enforcement Act. It's been around for a few Congresses. We've made a lot of progress on it. We've won votes on it. in key committees, even on the House floor at one point, but we haven't been able to get the entire bill over the finish line. And frankly, it was a little bit of a stretch to say to or for the Congress to say to the Department of Justice, hey, why don't you create a unit here at the department to focus on animal cruelty crimes? You can enforce our animal fighting laws, the Preventing Animal Cruelty and Torture Act, the Dog and Cat Meat Protection Act, the Horse Protection Act, and the wide variety of other laws that we've worked to pass through the years. Those laws are so important, but they're down the ledger in terms of priorities when you're in the environmental crime section or you're in the marine resources section. We need people who are thinking tactically about how to disband dogfighting networks and cockfighting networks and take on the trade in wildlife parts and to stop horse soaring and to stop other abuses of animals. So the ACE Act, which is HR 1477 in the House, which I hope after you get off the call tonight, you take a few minutes and fill out our alert and send a note to your U.S. representative and your 2 U.S. senators to co-sponsor HR 1477. But the congressional effort actually may be the less likely route for success for us, because the new Attorney General appointed by President Trump is Pam Bondi. And I want to tell you that I have worked with Pam Bondi for many years when she was the Attorney General of Florida. And I'll tell you that she sees the world when it comes to animals pretty similarly to the way I see the world for animals. She detests animal cruelty. And when LaShawn Johnson, a dog fighter, had the indictment against him unsealed, which was not a big moment in a case to unseal the indictment, General Bondi, now our United States Attorney General, confirmed by the Senate, she decided that she wanted to have a quote in the DOJ press release about this moment in this case against LaShawn Johnson, a former NFL player who had been convicted under Oklahoma law in 2005 for dogfighting. So he's a recidivist. It's his second arrest for this crime. And he had 190 dogs. Animal fighting is a social crime, so he's connected to a network of dog fighters and other dogfighting enthusiasts across the country. But she said animal abuse is cruel, depraved, and deserves severe punishment. The Department of Justice will prosecute this case to the fullest extent of the law and will remain committed to protecting innocent animals from those who would do them harm. Now, I've been doing this work for a long time. I can't think of too many times that an attorney general has spoken up on animal cruelty. I've seen assistant attorney generals do it in big cases. I've seen U.S. attorneys do it, but not so often the attorney general. And to me, this was predictable because Pam has a history of working on these issues. And I'll tell you, one of the most important things she did is she partnered with us with Animal Wellness Action and Grey 2K USA in 2018 in Florida to ban greyhound racing in that state. And greyhound racing has been in decline for a long time, but in 2018, there were still 18 tracks in the US. 2/3 of them were in Florida. Those 12 tracks were basically in the biggest 12 metropolitan areas of Florida. They'd been there for decades. They had a lot of history, a lot of branding, a lot of community connections. But when that issue got on the ballot, and it was only because Pam Bondi aggressively lobbied a constitutional revision commission as Attorney General, said we have to address this issue of the inhumane treatment of these dogs in the greyhound racing industry. Only because of her effort did it get on the ballot. And then she spoke up, we spoke up, others spoke up, and it passed 69-31 and outlawed greyhound racing and set us on a path to eliminate greyhound racing in the United States. We now just have 2 tracks left, and now we have a federal bill, the Greyhound Protection Act, that we're partnering with Grey 2K USA to address this issue. But Pam stood up on that. When I was leading another group, I had her speak at one of our conferences. She is passionate about animals. So General Bondi can create this section at the Department of Justice. And we want to encourage her. We want to have her make this a priority. The problem with animal issues is that we're down the ledger. Somebody in high public office needs to make animal cruelty a priority. And why? Because it's connected to other issues. And Tom, I want to bring you in here. As Joseph Grove, who opened the show tonight, said, Dr. Tom Poole's our senior veterinarian. He was the territorial vet for the U.S. holding of Guam, and he was on Guam for years prior to that because he's been in the U.S. military. He's career military. He's a colonel in the U.S. Army, and he was the commander of the U.S. Army Veterinary Command, which is a tri-service command. They were basically, Tom, I think you had about 2,500 people under you, vets and vet techs, working all over the world for the U.S. military. And thank you for your service, by the way, to the United States. And we're so glad to have you. But Tom, you've been on many sides of this as a veterinarian, seeing acts of cruelty to animals, but also working to strengthen laws on Guam, which is a tough place for animals in a lot of ways. And you also know the zoonotic disease threats that some forms of cruelty spread. So I'd love to have you tell us why you're so enthusiastic about the Animal Cruelty Enforcement Act and having an animal cruelty crime section.
Well, a great man said that passing the laws is one thing, but without enforcement, those are just aspirations. That was Wayne Pacelli who said that, but that's exactly right. And that was my experience on Guam too, as I worked for several years to try to get laws passed to make animal cruelty and neglect a third-degree felony, and was successful in that. But that was really less than half of the battle, because it is the enforcement piece that is so difficult. And just last night, I took our new senior assistant attorney general out to dinner, and trying to get him to come on board with the enforcement piece of this thing, because as you said, Wayne, these people have so much to do, so many other crimes. And so one of those other crimes has to get shoved aside to do an animal piece, because there's no dedicated animal section. And that's always difficult when you have all of these other crimes and they're always understaffed. And so that's why we desperately need this. And for our friends out there who love and care for animals, we have to push so hard on this to try to get this over the finish line, because this is the only way that I think that things are really going to change in the out years, is with a dedicated enforcement piece. Because cockfighting is a felony all over the United States, and it's the enforcement piece where we break down. Most of the cockfighting is happening in rural areas, so these are rural sheriffs that are responsible for doing that. And if you think, the cities are understaffed, these sheriff departments are terribly understaffed, and they're going up against organized, dangerous criminals that are always, I would say almost or always, involved in other crimes like prostitution and drugs and weapons and things like that. So these are very dangerous people asking some rural sheriff and his deputy to go take on. And so it is this enforcement piece from a federal level that will make all of the difference if we can get this. And I would like our friends, when you're talking to other friends about this, when you become, our proselytizers and our disciples in this mission, to try to get people to understand the importance of suffering, that how much these animals suffer and why it is so wrong. If you can make them understand that animals suffer exactly the same way we do, there is not the slightest research that indicates that they suffer any differently than we do. And they really have exactly the same right to be free of unnecessary pain that we have. Ask them to give you any justification for why an animal has any different rights to be free of pain. There are none. Is it intelligence? Do more intelligent people have a greater freedom from pain than less intelligent people? Is it opposable thumbs or paraplegics? Did they lose their rights to be free of unnecessary suffering? These animals should never experience unnecessary suffering for any reason. There's simply no justification for it. And people who willfully do that, they're not part of the tribe. There's something fundamentally wrong with them. And these are dangerous people that are much more likely to be abusing spouses, to be abusing children, to be committing other crimes. So we need to segregate them, and we can only do that through enforcement. And that comes through this bill, if we can get this over the line. And we need your help desperately for this. And then the last thing that I would mention is the danger, both financially and in terms of physical health too, from not controlling these diseases, particularly now in cockfighting, because of the risk posed by H5N1 avian influenza, which is a much greater threat to our health than COVID ever was. And these cockfighters are uniquely important in potentiating and spreading this disease because they house these fighting birds individually outside by the hundreds and thousands, unlike poultry that are in broiler farms or egg farms that are very carefully isolated from wild birds. The expense they go to trying to isolate those birds from wild birds is substantial because that's where this disease is spread. But that's not the case with these fighting hawks that are out there individually exposed all the time to wild birds. And then the second part of that thing is the human exposure, in that these cockfighters are playing with these birds, holding these birds, grooming these birds. And so that close, intimate contact makes it so much easier for the human to become the incubator for that avian virus. And you get something called reassortment. So if that human happens to have human influenza at the same time he contracts H5N1 avian influenza from that bird, then inside one cell, you get mixing of these two influenza viruses, and you have the ability to make a new pandemic virus that has some or all of the pathogenicity, that is the disease-causing potential of avian influenza, with some or all of the transmissibility of human influenza. That's how you get a devastating pandemic that would make us forget that COVID ever happened. And the cockfighters are probably ground zero for that, for the reasons I just said, because of what they're exposing their birds to, and then their intimate contact with those birds. So if you wonder why egg prices, went to $12 a dozen, it was because of avian influenza. That's nothing what it would do to us if it jumps into humans, and the cockfighters are really key to that. So we absolutely, for every reason in the world, have to get this under control, and this is our best shot at it. So anything you can do to help us, we're so grateful. Thank you, Wayne.
Well, no, Tom, thank you. That was great. And let me just put a fine point on that, Tom. We're talking, if we have 10 full-time prosecutors at the Department of Justice focused on animal cruelty crimes, we're talking a budget, $2 million, maybe something in that range. We've had 15 outbreaks of an avian disease called virulent Newcastle disease in the U.S. over the last few decades. 10, you and Dr. Jim Keene on our staff wrote an incredible report about cockfighting and avian diseases. It's on our website for anyone who wants to read about it. But 15 outbreaks that cost the United States billions of dollars, billions. We had massive depopulation of birds to try to control the spread of the disease. The USDA would basically, put a circle around a major infection area, and then they'd kill all the birds, every kind of bird, commercial flocks, backyard birds, parrots as your pets, kill everything, and then they indemnify the owners, the taxpayers pay the money. 10 of those 15 outbreaks, 10 of 15, 66%, were tied to smuggled fighting birds from Mexico into the United States. So if you're talking about $2 million a year to have prosecutors, and you prevent disease from spreading, what is the ROI on that? I mean, we have saved the United States so much money. And then the other part of this, of course, is the social effect. And that's where I want to turn to my friend, Zach Scow, who's our Central California director, but best known for running Marley's Mutts with this positive change program. Zach, you deal with in your work where you have placed animals, dogs who are going to be euthanized, you bring them into a prison to interact with the inmates and under proper supervision and care so the animals are protected, to try to stir the compassion and empathy in these folks, because we can't incarcerate everyone for the rest of their lives, right? They're going to come out, and we hope that people are going to be civilized and humane and good to one another. But this is the problem with animal cruelty, is that that's an indicator of a loss of empathy. And if you don't interrupt that, and you don't have treatment programs like the ones that you've been doing, then what happens? I mean, so I've just thrown a lot at you, but I'd love for you to tell people about this connection between animal cruelty and human violence, which I know you've
Mhm.
seen.
Well, certainly there's a bunch of different studies that show how cruelty to animals then translates to human beings. It's almost a foregone conclusion. It's your next step on that line of cruelty in general. You're right about, the culture of dogfighting, certainly within the criminal element. We have a lot of guys. The way our program runs, we run in juvenile facilities, federal facilities, women's, men's, but predominantly we're bringing dogs off the euthanasia list and we're rehabilitating them in prison. We're teaching a class that is acute dog training. We also work on areas of sobriety and wellness, things like the four agreements. We throw a lot of things out at these guys. The idea being that you can't incubate people in negativity for decades and then send them home and expect them to behave any better. And that's really what we're doing. We're incubating folks in such a dark negative space, and then crossing our fingers that they're going to return home with some sort of epiphany, some sort of moral epiphany that hasn't taken place. And the epiphany that those dogs that come in to mutually rehabilitate alongside our guys, the process that they go through is remarkable. It is absolutely remarkable. I remember having three different students, all from Greater Compton, South LA area, who only had interactions with pit bulls in dogfighting rinks. So their only prior experience with pit bulls, therefore why they had so much fear about these dogs, was related to dogfighting. And each of them got to rehabilitate for a number of years. Each of these guys was in our program for 3 to 5 years. We're able to not just change their ethos, but become entirely different people who were hyper empathetic. These became hyper empathetic individuals who then went back out into their community to bring the ethos of animal wellness, rescue, animal sheltering, rehabilitation, all of these things into that community. So what we've seen with many of our graduates is they get out of prison, they return to the communities that they're from, and they help spread this idea of empathy, of caring for animals, of treating man's best friend as just that instead of as our worst enemy. And we have a kind of an American policy of treating man's best friend as our worst enemy. And watching these guys turn that corner, and many of them get involved in the pet industry as dog trainers, kennel technicians, veterinary technicians. We have 30 formerly incarcerated gang members who are all actively involved in training with rescues, shelters, small business owners, and working and bringing animal sheltering and rescue into those communities that we've so pushed away. We've done a pretty poor job of bringing marginalized communities into our ethos, into our ideology, to help them understand what it is that we're getting after. So it's been really neat to see our guys return home to their environments, to their social networks, and to spread this much more loving, empathetic, idealistic love.
Well, and again, Zach, I think it's incredible work. And, I wrote a book called The Bond, which talks about our human connection to other animals, that this is a hardwired connection in us. I
Yeah.
mean, if we humans have been around for a couple 100,000 years, most of our history was as hunters and gatherers, and we were connected to animals. Yes, animals were killed, but there were often rituals of apology and atonement to the animals. There was an understanding that we were going to come back as animals. There was a respect and an appreciation. Fast forward to our modern 21st century, where we're living in dwellings and we've got 8 billion people on the planet. I mean, we bring animals into our homes. We have pets in our lives, tens of millions of them. We have parks that we go to, that we love to watch wild animals, and we want to see trees and nature. I mean, we are built, hardwired to love animals and to be connected to animals. And this can be lost, right? With desensitizing activities like dogfighting as a young person. And what you're doing is you're just re-enlivening the natural instincts that people have to be drawn to other creatures.
Oh, dogs are medicine. Dogs are medicine. Animals are medicine. And so many of us are trudging through this world broken, dejected, traumatized, and generally feeling unloved. And when you generally feel unloved, whether or not you're willing to admit that or not, it's very difficult to love the rest of the world. If you don't love yourself, it's very difficult to get through trials and tribulations in life without being reactive and negative. And what dogs, especially in a setting inside of a maximum security prison when you're serving a very long sentence, is they help rebuild your humanity, give you access to your humanity, and help you understand reciprocal love. Love is something that, when you've been detached from it socially and culturally, it can be very difficult to reestablish it. So it gives us an opportunity to mutually heal, to feel unconditional love and give unconditional love. And my favorite thing about bringing dogs to live in prison for 3.5 months is that it brings a little piece of home into the prison, because prison, 99% of those guys are coming home. They're almost all coming home. And do you want them to have initiated a rehabilitative process that involves empathy and love and understanding and connection, or do you want them to return dark, broken, and detached from society? And these dogs, like no other program I've ever seen, help tap into an individual's soul and help correct some of the traumas and the whatever however love has been sucked out of their life. It helps reinstill love into their life. And when you have love coursing through your veins again, you become a different person. It brings home into the penitentiary, and when home comes in there, you start to work to try to get home. So the way you behave while you're incarcerated, the way you behave with your fellow man and woman. And one of the coolest things about this too, which I don't want to forget to touch on, is California state penal system. The penitentiary system in California is very segregated. We are rigidly racially segregated. So black, white, Hispanic, others, these are groups of races that are not interacting. You're not eating together, trading together, working out together, socializing together, any of these things. But you bring those dogs into the mix and you have everybody mutually contributing to a program that is moving all of you forward, and they start to work outside of their races, outside of their gangs. And we always have 3 student inmates per dog, all teamed up outside of their races. So you have this unity and this symbiosis that develops and this collective moving forward. And that's one of the things that this act is going to help us accomplish, is societally pushing the needle, moving forward. We've all culturally, everybody, we don't need to run another, we don't need to take a survey on who wants enforcement of laws and who wants everybody wants it. We've known it for decades, from Michael Vick up to this point. And where we failed is in enforcement. I mean, I've been in this community now in animal rescue and welfare for 24 years. I've seen more cockfighting rings, dogfighting, rings, so to speak. But these things, almost none of them get followed through on. And we see them while we're canvassing for spay and neuter. When we canvass for spay and neuter, we're going throughout a community. We're in the most disenfranchised, poorest of the poor, often crime-riddled areas, and we are going door to door meeting all these individuals. We have stumbled across, I don't know how many cockfighting rings. I don't know how many amateur dogfighting rings, reported them, and had virtually no follow through, because exactly like Dr. Poole said, there is no mechanism for enforcement. We can have the toughest rules that we want for animal welfare and support, but if there's no enforcement mechanism, it's all for naught. And all of us out here on the west, we have just been pushing for it and pushing for it. And again, spinning off what Dr. Poole said, we are in rural communities. Kern County animal control officers, along with sheriffs, are not going to be covering this vast hundreds and hundreds of square miles that they could never hope to cover to respond to a stray animal, much less do a full investigation in these communities. So when this gets passed, this is going to be a really big deal for us to start making some huge sociocultural difference.
Yeah, no, Zach, that's great. And it's when you're talking about these inmates who are troubled, right? They've had some trauma in their life. They've lost something. They've lost their goodness. They've lost their connection to others. That's how it's part of the reason for committing violence. I'm reading a book now called The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
And it's about, people who had a trauma in their childhood, right? There's a reason that people self-mutilate, or the reason that they become so isolated, whether it's sexual abuse or whether it's some, parental abuse, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Our troops, and Tom, I mean, you're a veteran. I mean, I think about, these young men and women who are serving in combat and what they're seeing. And, we know a lot more about PTSD than we ever did. The body keeps the score. And then I think about all these animals. I think about all the trauma that they endure.
Sure.
They remember what's going on. They know what's going on. My dog, who, got hit by a car before we got him, he's happy-go-lucky, but, I can see little flashes, of what he went through, and broke 2 legs, broke his pelvis in 4 places. Somehow he survived a month with 2 broken legs on the same side and a broken pelvis. It's incredible. there's a lot of trauma in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And, we cannot tolerate people who are going to harm other people. But
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, we got to figure out how to
Mm-hmm.
make people better and how to turn them into functioning people in our society.
Yeah.
But one thing that certainly is not going to do that is when people commit crimes day after day or week after week or month after month and nothing happens. With
Totally.
cockfighting, we might have 150,000 backyard cockfighting
Mm-hmm.
operations in the United States. In the
Mm-hmm.
last 4 weeks, Animal Wellness Action, Center for Humane Economy, working with Showing Animals Respect and Kindness, a great group that's run by Steve Hindy, we together have basically investigated and droned and then exposed and called the cops to break up 7 cockfighting operations in the last 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Why did it take a little
Mm-hmm.
nonprofit, a pair of nonprofit groups to do this? I mean, the sheriffs are in those communities. They know there were 250 people at one cockfight, right? There were
Mm-hmm.
150 cars. There's a fighting pit. So we play a really important role, but my God, we've got to have a tactical approach from
Yeah.
our law enforcement community to attack these problems
Yeah.
because it's going to cost our society with zoonotic disease. It's going to cost us in terms of social violence. And, this little animal cruelty crime section can be transformative on animal protection. I really believe it.
I
And
wanted to touch on one thing you said really quick,
please,
Wayne, that was so
yeah.
important, man. Is a lot of us can go through a lot of different ways to try to repair ourselves, to try to exercise the trauma, to try to address it, to try to have it breathe, to try to give it something else to focus on, to whatever the strategy is to get better. And I'll tell you what, and I'm sure I'm on a call with a bunch of people that would relate to this, that this will resonate with. Nothing has resonated with me more in terms of my lack of value in myself than what my dog has shown me about myself. And that's what we're seeing in prison. And that's that special medicine that animals have, is they have, through unconditional love, this ability to show us that we are enough. We all, I mean, whether people, like I said, want to admit it or not, what most of us suffer with is not enoughism. We just don't believe we're enough. And what our dogs will show us 9 times out of 10, if we're capable of listening and spending the time and taking it seriously, is that we are enough. And you begin to feel it inside of you. What we see in our students is they begin to know it. They begin to really understand that when that dog's staring back at you, those love bombs that they're sending through their, it begins to permeate. It begins to have a legitimate effect, and they start to walk differently, talk differently, interact with their fellow students differently, interact with dogs differently. One of the most interesting things is to watch these guys from week one, when they can be a little bit rougher on the leashes, maybe just defaulting back to however they grew up with animals, and watching them become so much more conscientious and mindful about every bit of pressure they put on that leash, every bit of interaction they have with that dog, every bit of positive or negative reinforcement. They're so much more conscious. And sometimes it's difficult for us to receive messages from human beings. It can not mean as much. But if you spend enough time with a dog and you're in a low enough state, or you spend enough time with an animal that you're connected to, it will rebuild you like nothing else will, you know?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Tom and Zach. I know there's some questions that people have for both of you and perhaps for me as well. Joseph, I'm sure that the comments from Dr. Poole and Zach have stirred people.
Thank you, Wayne. And indeed, we've received a number of good questions. I'll begin posing them to you. The first speaks to the new FBI director, Kash Patel. What do we expect from him in terms of support for this new legislation?
Well, I'm actually very heartened that in that Department of Justice press release announcing the unsealing of the indictment again against LaShawn Johnson, who's from Eastern Oklahoma, had a massive dogfighting operation, 190 dogs seized, the largest federal seizure of fighting dogs ever in the United States. He also took the opportunity, which I thought was very unusual in my experience in dealing with federal agencies. He took the opportunity to have an extended quote saying that this FBI is not going to tolerate this, that animal cruelty is related to other crimes, organized crimes, and we're going to stop it. And frankly, Joseph, what it's third in me was a thought, not only do we want to ask General Pam Bondi to create an animal cruelty crime section at the Department of Justice, again, not needing to get Congress's authorization. Congress clearly has the authority to direct DOJ, but DOJ can do it on its own. And Pam as the head of DOJ, the Attorney General, can do it. But now I want to ask Kash Patel to create an animal cruelty crimes policing section, to have FBI agents who are dedicated to investigating animal cruelty crimes. Because as I said with that little law and order mantra, you know, there are two different law enforcement actors required to have successful policing and prosecutions. You have to have someone investigate the crimes, make the arrest, that's the police. Different names, they're sheriffs, they're local police, they're FBI agents at the federal level, they're US Marshals, they're Homeland Security investigations, there are border and customs agents, and then you have to have the prosecutors. So if we just have the prosecutors, that's great. We're going to have a leg up, but we need both. So I'm hoping that Kash Patel is, I don't know him, you know, I've known Pam Bondi and I know of her commitment. Whatever you think about her on the other issues, I'm not commenting on that. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, my job, our job here is to focus on animal welfare. And if we've got a leader in animal welfare as Attorney General, I'm going to take that opportunity to work to advance those ideals. And Kash Patel, the same thing. If he's with us on animal welfare, this is a great opportunity on our set of issues.
Great. Thank you, Wayne. Zach, one of our readers was concerned about the safety of the dogs in some of the environments where they work with prisoners. Have you had any experience where the animals have incurred or experienced any kind of distress in that environment?
No, you know, quite the opposite. We've been in the state prison system now for 10 years. We've rescued and rehabilitated 700 dogs in that program, 1,500 to 1,600 student inmates. And we have certain parameters around admission. So you can't have been involved in an animal related crime. You can't have been involved in certain types of female crime. The reason being that we have so many female trainers. Other than that, we really don't have other parameters. We are dealing with long-term incarcerated at maximum security prisons. So the vast majority of our students are involved in loss of life crimes and are serving decades in prison, most of whom are towards the end of their terms. And in fact, we have 5 dogs that were part of a California city bust and seizure that took a while, just as Wayne was explaining, because there aren't those 2 law enforcement elements available to prosecute in a timely manner. This rescue, this individual had 45 dogs. They were in deplorable conditions. Several of them were dead. And because of the lack of enforcement, it took a while to finally put charges on her. But all the dogs were confiscated. We took most of them, and 6 of them, I think, are now in positive change. So you have dogs coming from a very abusive, neglectful situation into positive change, where they're going to be doted over, trained, loved on, and really kind of rebuilt inside the prison system. We've sent a lot of really traumatized dogs through there. We've sent dogs that have been shot in the face, shot in the back. We sent a dog who had no eyes, who had been shot in the face with a shotgun, and who was rehabilitated in that program in a remarkable way. And inside the institutions, these guys are terribly not only defensive of the program, but absolutely in love with these animals. They are incredibly protective over the program. They don't want anything to happen to these dogs or the program. And if anybody within the class even so much as does a correction, we don't allow for corrections in our initial rounds of the program for sort of obvious reasons. You know, there's a lot to be said for it. And if anybody so much as looks at the dogs wrong, who happens to be in that pod or is on the prison yard, you know, it's not a good thing. And luckily, our program has such we've built up a lot of appeal within the institution. We've built up a lot of love going in there for so many years that, for the most part, the rest of the inmates on the yard and in those housing units want to do everything possible to help us make the program keep going, because they get some of the ancillary benefits of having dogs run around in the pod. Like, for instance, we had a riot at one of our prisons here recently last week. Our program is allowed to function despite the entire institution being on lockdown. So to be able to go in a completely locked down level 4, 180 maximum security prison and see dogs playing fetch in the housing unit is really remarkable. It's such a juxtaposition. So those dogs are very well protected. There are all kinds of, we have eyeballs on these dogs at all times. So if there were even so much as a filed complaint about a student inmate doing something incorrect, every institution has cameras. We have watch commanders, sergeants who are in the housing unit. But my experience over the last 10 years has been these guys would do anything for those dogs. They would do anything. They would lay down their lives for them. They become absolutely dedicated to these kiddos. And again, that's part of their rebuilding. The toughest part, to be honest, with the dogs in there is that we all have attachment issues. A lot of us do, through life, and certainly those who are incarcerated have attachment issues. So the toughest part is taking them out and sending them to a home to be adopted, because those guys fall head over heels in love with these dogs, and they can kind of tie in some of their own identity into these dogs who have helped rebuild them. A lot of these guys have been incarcerated for decades. When you're stewing in that kind of a negative incubator for just acute darkness surrounded by violence for that many years, it can really break you down. It really, really breaks you down, where it's so difficult to share and express emotions of any sort. But what that dog requires from you is your emotions. It requires all of you. The first thing we teach those guys is when you take this leash, you are responsible for your energy that you're transmitting into this dog. That is an umbilical cord of energy. When you take that leash, whether you're feeling angry, lonely, upset, tired, mad at your old lady, mad at the correctional, whatever, you better address it. You better pause. You better breathe. If you're not ready to go, you better pass that leash on to your fellow handler, because you do not want that energy going through that leash. So again, to answer
Well,
your
maybe
earlier
that's why my
question,
dog is so crusty but benign.
1000%, buddy.
That exactly, the dog is picking up on that. Zach, thank you. I'm getting a lot of comments about your work, a lot of interest in it. I will include in the email that follows up tomorrow a link to the podcast you did with me, where you do have a great opportunity to say even more about it, as well as a way to follow you on Facebook and support your work directly through that. So to all the folks who are asking about Zach and his work, I'll send you some more information tomorrow. Dr. Poole, this question is for you, sir. Some of the national veterinary associations have disappointed animal lovers because, for example, they've not taken a stand against horse slaughter. Do these national veterinary organizations have a perspective on ACE? And if not, why not?
Well, that's a good question, and sort of an embarrassing question for me. I have sort of been at odds with a lot of these, national veterinary organizations. I think that part of it is the economics of all of this stuff, and that we are often, for example, we've been working so hard on Proposition 12 and trying to get these sows out of these horribly cruel gestation crates. And yet the American Association of Swine Veterinarians, they're completely fine with gestation crates. Not the veterinarians themselves, I think, but the organization. And so and I think it's just the influence of money and the economics of this that end up being what we're trying to overcome. The veterinarians that I know, all of the veterinarians that I know, love animals and care about these things. The organizations, that's a little different. So, I'm sort of the wrong guy to ask, because I'm going to say the wrong thing because it really frustrates me.
No, I think a lot of these veterinary subgroups like swine vets or laboratory animal vets, or whatever category, they work for industry, and they adopt the ideology of the industry. And this is what's happening. This is what's happened over a long time. Now you have so many women who are now dominating the veterinary schools, right? It used to be 90-10 male, female. Tom, I don't know what your class ratio was gender-wise.
That's about what it was, about 90-10, and it's still 90-10, only it's the other way,
It's, yeah, right. So
So
that's a big change, that women are coming into the sphere. And then, of course, many of them are going into jobs because of the surge in companion animal keeping. They're doing small animal practice, right? So they don't have any economic interest in exploiting animals. They don't have their paycheck tied to continuation of these extreme confinement conditions on a factory farm, or frankly, the stuff I've been seeing on horse racing with vets doping horses to give them an advantage in racing, I mean, it's like a drug factory. There was an incredible piece recently about the number of drugs and all these different circumstances where they're trying to juice the horses, which puts them at risk. I mean, horses are big-bodied animals running at 45 miles an hour on these champagne glass legs. They break down, right? And they break down more often when they're doped and they're drugged. So, yeah, we need more vets to speak up. I mean, I know so many vets who care, but it's like there's like this other universe out there, and the AVMA, American Veterinary Medical Association, has not endorsed the ACE Act. Heck, the AVMA hasn't even endorsed the Fight Act to combat dogfighting and cockfighting. I mean, that to me is just, it's a mind-blowing circumstance. Because you know why? Because the Cattlemen's Association, the pork producers don't like that we are trying to stop extreme confinement. And they work with the AVMA, say, don't work with them. They're going to be bad for us. Don't endorse their bill on the Fight Act. I mean, come on. It's just, it's juvenile at some level, what goes on politically with some of these organizations. I want these groups, the pork producers, say, well, yeah, we're for dogfighting. I mean, that will just expose them as, what a public relations opportunity for them to say, yeah, we're endorsing the Fight Act. We believe in animal care. What a smart move, where they would then take the position that they actually do care about some animals. But no, they quietly work to undermine efforts to crack down on dogfighting and cockfighting. It's mind-boggling.
Wayne, another question. Right now, every morning we see headlines about this agency's being cut, these people are being laid off. It seems to be against the current political stream to create more bureaucracy, perhaps. In this era of Doge, does creating another department stand a chance?
Oh, yes, it does. Well, listen, at the Department of Justice, they've cut a bunch of positions. They've cut them in a number of areas, environmental justice, DEI. There are full-time positions available that are funded. And as we said, this is going to be a positive for the Treasury of the United States. You make arrests, people are going to get fines, they're going to go into a fund, and then you're going to prevent disease from spreading. A $2 million annual investment is going to generate $1 billion of value for the United States. I mean, I can't think of anything better than that, right? In the stock market, you get an 8% return, you're happy. You're talking about an 80,000% return here. So yes, I think, and we're also, Joseph, talking about a small program. We're talking about 10 prosecutors, maybe 20 people in the whole section, and you're doing it because you're going to make our community safer, you're going to protect against disease, you're going to safeguard the Treasury. These indemnity payments, we spent more than $2 billion to indemnify farmers and other private owners of birds during this H5N1 crisis. $2 billion.
Can I say something about that, Wayne? I think what people need to understand is we have a real opportunity here to shift the needle in a huge way. And with this small government, like you said, $2 million is virtually nothing. For this task force to be created to go after animal cruelty, that's at the federal level. That's wonderful. But what's gonna happen is that ethos, that approach to law enforcement will trickle down to the states, will trickle down to the counties, will trickle down to the municipalities, and those various entities will start working on their own task forces to address local, issues around cockfighting, dogfighting, animal cruelty, illegal breeding operations, etc. We have been pulling for something with enforcement teeth for so long because it's the critical missing variable. And although this seems like somewhat small, a handful of people, 10, 11 folks, when the ethos trickles down to the local level, it's going to make all the difference in the world, and we will finally be able to address animal cruelty at a pinpoint level.
Well, Zach, it's such an important point, because what it will do, it will normalize the notion that having structures and law enforcement capacity focused on animal cruelty is a worthwhile effort, and there's precedent for it. And listen, we just know that, I mean, you said it, the sociological literature, I know on the call, one of the listeners is Dr. Virginia Maxwell of the University of New Haven, who is a professor of forensics, and she has studied this animal cruelty, human violence issue, and she and other people know the literature on this issue. I mean, Zach, when you were talking about the psychology of the animals and the psychology of the people, I mean, this is why people who've lost their empathy hurt animals, because they're an available victim and they can't say anything, right? You abuse a little girl or a little boy, you know, you might be able to stifle them from talking about it, but you know that the animal can't speak. And it's just an opportunity for them, right? And then it just encourages them from there. So how could we not do this?
And
How could we
counter,
not?
this is an opportunity for us to swing the other way and go viral about advocating for animals and representing animals and rooting for them. There's one anecdote I got to share. When we brought the dogs into the Tehachapi State Prison, every team, every cell that has dog team members in there has a picture of the student inmate who's in the cell, as well as the dog on the door. That pod, that housing unit, got so excited and so happy about having dogs around. And they got so integrated into this idea of giving and exchanging love and caring for something greater than yourself. Let's not forget that. When you get to take care of and serve something greater than yourself, an animal in need, that is a spiritual principle upon which all life progress is made. You know, service over self is how you get going, in terms of progress. So what happened is the other side of the housing unit started to rescue animals off the yard. So we start seeing a mole, then we see a bird, then two black widows. All of these different animals are in cells, and because the staff is so supportive of the program, they let these guys having nothing to do with the program, who are rescuing animals off the prison yard, put their own little identification things up on their cell. So you got a little blind mole in this cell, you got a spider in this cell. So these guys got a taste of caring for something greater than themselves and started to do it wherever they could on the yard, caring for these animals, putting together broken pigeons, and carrying around lizards and moles. And it was really, really remarkable.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Zach, thank you. And Wayne, thank you. We are almost at the top of the hour. And I want to thank everyone in advance who's attended and for your questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get them all. That's a bad thing for the people who asked the questions, but please know that's a real encouragement for us because it shows the level of passion and interest. Ryan, I'm going to ask Wayne this final question and turn it over to him for closing remarks. Would you please post in the chat for everyone again our action alert so that people tonight can correspond with their legislators to promote passage of this critical bill? I'd sure appreciate that. So Wayne, when I first started working in animal advocacy, one of the most appalling things I heard about were crush videos. And if folks listening to this don't know what crush videos are, they can Google that and be prepared for what they get. What other kinds of animal cruelty will this address, and will it go so far as to look at things that happen at puppy mills, for example?
Yeah. You know, Joseph, I've been involved for many years in doing, as you said in the intro, a lot of policy work. And, I'm proud to have been involved in helping advance so many of our federal laws. There was a time when we didn't have many federal laws for animals. It was 2019. We have a national anti-cruelty statute. Also in 2018, we passed legislation to ban animal fighting everywhere, including on Guam, where Dr. Poole lives, and Puerto Rico, which had 100 cockfighting arenas. There's a dog and cat meat protection act. There's a horse protection act that stops horse soring. There's a pet and women's safety act that deals with the connection between domestic violence and cruelty to animals. I mean, there are a raft of statutes, and I'll post something at some point about all the statutes that can be enforced by this unit or this section at the Department of Justice. The crush videos was just one of those unimaginable sorts of things. I mean, I was involved with an investigation that found 3,000 separately produced crush videos with, people doing this for kind of prurient interests, a sexual interest, stepping on the animals with high-heeled shoes, like people with a foot fetish, crushing a monkey or a puppy. I mean, it's almost like you couldn't imagine the diabolical, sickening nature of this human behavior. I mean, it really makes you think about the potential for evil. And I couldn't believe it, but we passed a law in 1999. It actually got struck down by the Supreme Court, but we were ready. And literally the next day after the court ruled, we got a new bill passed through Congress to shut this down. But you know what? We know where a lot of these crush videos are. We know where they're being sold, but we don't have the prosecutors to handle it. Just like we know where the dogfighters are, we know where the cockfighters are, we know where so many of these people are, but we just don't have the policing and the prosecutors to handle it. It is so maddening and it's so frustrating. And that's why, for me, having this law enforcement capacity is so important. The reason we're asking you, I just want to be clear, we're asking you to write to your legislators because we have two potential pathways for reform. One is for Congress to pass a statute that directs the agency, the Department of Justice, to do this. The other pathway is for the Attorney General and also potentially the FBI director to create a policing animal cruelty crimes unit and a prosecutor's unit. But there's often an interplay between the Congress and the executive agencies. So when the executive agency sees, oh, there's strong bipartisan support for this idea in Congress, it makes it easier for the Attorney General or the Interior Secretary or the Ag Secretary to do something on animal welfare when they see that support. So we want to show Pam Bondi that there's an incredible amount of support for this, and that's going to make it easier for her to act. Now, I think she's got the strength and the vision to do it on her own, knowing where her heart is on animals, but we don't want to leave anything to chance. And she's got a lot of stuff going on. We have to make our case. We have to show that this is a concern of the American public. If we don't make the case, who's going to do it? So that's why we are rising up here. That's why we organized this webinar. And let me just say that having Dr. Poole and Zach Scow on the line, man, you guys are awesome. I love you both. You are fine human beings. You are good human beings. You make me feel hopeful about this world. And we need each other. We need each other. It's a lonely fight to help animals at some level. But when you got your comrades in arms, it makes a big difference. And I think for all of you listening, for all of you listening, we're with you. You're with us. You are not alone. And, every cause that is important is worth fighting for. I mean, it really is. If it were easy, somebody else would have done it. But we can get this done. If we don't get this done, I'll be very disappointed. And I'll be surprised because I still, after all these years of seeing all this horror with animals, I still believe in reason and logic. I still believe in understanding our values and logically applying them. And I just don't get how people can do these things to animals. But what I also understand is that we can stop them from doing these things to animals. And that's the point of this. So Joseph, thank you very much for hosting your great hosting work. And thanks everybody for listening in.
Yeah. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Zach. And for all of the folks who signed up and tuned in, we're grateful for you for watching this Claudia Miller Ignite series on animal welfare. Look for our follow-up email tomorrow and stay tuned for details on the next event in this series. You can find us on Facebook, X, and LinkedIn, and we look forward to engaging with you there and in your inbox as we work together to make a better world for animals. Because, as we say, helping animals helps us all. On behalf of Wayne, Tom, and Zach, and Ryan, our producer, thanks again, and we wish you good night.